She has nothing left to lose. Lauren knows this the way she knows the frostbite eating at her fingers, not as a thought, but as a fact carved into her bones. For 5 days she has stood outside the iron gates of the North Wolf Fortress. 5 days since Thomas's silver locket arrived at their door with no note, no explanation, no brother attached to it. 5 days since the world she knew folded in on itself like paper in a fire. She has tried reasoning with the guards. She has tried begging. She has tried simply standing there long enough that someone might take pity on the woman wrapped in a cloak so worn the wind cuts straight through it. But the soldiers of Iron Halt do not see a desperate sister. They see a problem. Something to ignore until it goes away on its own, the way cold eventually numbs you past the point of feeling. So when the great iron gates groan open and the Alpha King himself rides through on a black stallion so massive its hooves crack the frozen ground like gunshots, Lauren does the only thing left available to her. She doesn't move. She stands directly in his path, her chin lifted, her hands trembling inside her cloak, and she holds the broken locket out like an offering. "My brother," she says, and her voice does not shake, which surprises even her. "His name is Thomas. He came through these gates 3 weeks ago and he has not come back. Please. I only want to know if he is alive." The courtyard does not go quiet. Still goes. The kind of stillness that happens when an entire crowd decides simultaneously to stop existing. Because the woman standing in the path of that horse is speaking directly to Alpha King Alvin of the North, the Wolf King, the Iron Sovereign, the man who ended the great betrayal 10 years ago and has ruled these lands with the cold efficiency of a man who has seen too much of what mercy costs. He looks down at her from the saddle. His face is a sculptor's idea of severity. Sharp jaw, sharp eyes, sharp everything, as though grief and governance have chiseled away every soft edge he was ever born with. He is draped in black fur that makes him look like a piece of the storm itself, and the way he holds the reins knuckles white. Grip absolute speaks to a man whose control over everything around him is the only thing keeping him standing. Those eyes find her. Dark. Unreadable. The color of deep water in winter. "Remove her," he says. Not to her. To the guards beside him. She is not worth a direct address. She is an inconvenience to be managed. A stray to be returned to the cold. 2 soldiers step toward her. Lauren turns. She will not cry in front of him. She has decided this. Whatever happens next, whether she freezes on the road, whether Thomas is already gone, whether this was always how the story ended, she will not give the Wolf King the satisfaction of her tears. She has taken 4 steps toward the gate when the sound reaches her. Low, ancient, tectonic, not a bark, not a snarl. Something older than language, older than law, a sound that seems to come from the ground itself, from the marrow of the world. He turns. Frank has moved. Lauren has heard of werewolves. Everyone in the north has. They run alongside the king's army like living shadows, creatures of instinct and impossible loyalty, bonded to a single master for the whole of their lives. She has seen them from a distance, from far distance, the way you observe a storm system moving across the horizon, something powerful enough that proximity feels irresponsible. She has never been this close. Frank is enormous in a way that reorganizes your understanding of size. His shoulders rise level with her chest. His fur is the color of smoke and old ash, mapped with the pale lines of 100 battles, and his amber eyes, the only warm thing in this entire courtyard, are fixed on her with an expression she cannot name. He has placed himself between her and the gate. His body is not tense. He is not growling anymore. He is simply there, immovable as the fortress walls, as certain as the cold, blocking the only exit with the absolute calm of something that has made a decision it does not intend to revisit. "Frank." The king's voice is a blade across the courtyard. "Move." Frank does not move. The silence that follows is the loudest thing Lauren has ever heard. She watches the guards exchange glances at the rapid, panicked communication of people who have just realized the rules they understood no longer apply. She watches the king's jaw tighten, watches something complicated move behind those unreadable eyes. She watches the most powerful man in the north tell his wolf, for the second time, to move. And she watches Frank look at the king with those ancient amber eyes and then slowly, deliberately, lower his massive head into Lauren's lap. She stops breathing. His weight is extraordinary. His fur is warm in a way that makes her realize, distantly, that she has not been warm in 5 days. His eyes close. A long exhale moves through him, slow, contented, final, and his great body settles against the frozen ground beside her feet, as though he has been waiting for this exact moment. Around them, not one person speaks. Then, from somewhere behind her, "That is not possible." Lauren doesn't know what is impossible. She knows her hands are shaking. She knows the wolf's fur is the warmest thing she has touched since Thomas disappeared. She knows the entire North Wolf Fortress has stopped existing around her, and it is just her and this impossible creature and the broken locket still clutched in her fist. "Good boy," she whispers, because she has no other language for this. Frank's tail moves. Once. A single, slow sweep against the frozen ground. Heavy footsteps approach. She looks up. King Alvin has dismounted. He stands 3 feet away, and his expression still cannot read it. Not entirely, but something has cracked behind the frost of it. Something that looks almost like recognition. Almost like pain. "He has never done that," the king says, and his voice has lost its edge. It sounds, suddenly, like a man speaking to himself. "In 10 years. Not once." Lauren's fingers tighten in Frank's fur. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. What is your name?" She meets his eyes. "Lauren." Something moves across his face. She cannot name it. It is too fast and too complicated and too large for the cold air between them. He studies her for a long moment. The threadbare cloak, the frostbitten fingers, the broken locket, the sapphire steadiness of her gaze, and she watches him arrive at a decision that clearly costs him something. "Bring her inside," he says, to no one in particular. "Find her a room. Food. Whatever she needs." A guard steps forward. "Your Majesty, the wolf." Frank lifts his head. One rumble, low and certain, and the guard retreats 2 steps without further comment. "Frank stays with her," Alvin says. He turns away. His black cloak snaps behind him as he strides toward the fortress entrance, and Lauren watches him go, watching the rigid line of his shoulders, the tight precision of each step, the posture of a man carrying a weight he has learned not to set down. But before he reaches the door, she sees it. His hands are shaking. 3 floors above the courtyard, a woman named Anna stands at the infirmary window, watching. She has been brought to Iron Halt to solve a problem that should not exist. The king's episodes, the blackouts, the violent transformations that leave him hollow and trembling and more frightened than he will ever admit. She has been studying him for weeks. She has found nothing. But she has found something else. Something she has not yet told anyone. She watches the girl cross the courtyard with the werewolf pressed against her side. Steady as a wall, warm as a living promise. "Interesting," Anna murmurs. Behind her, Stephanie, the head maid, a woman whose observations have kept this household running for 15 years, makes a sound of concern. "That girl won't last a week. The king doesn't keep strays." "The king didn't make this choice," Anna says quietly, turning back to her workbench. "Frank did." He picks up a vial. "Set it down. Pick up another." "And in the entire history of werewolves," she says, more to herself than to Stephanie, "they bond once. Only once." The implication hangs in the cold air between them. Which means either everything we know is wrong or there is something in that girl's blood that Frank recognized before any of us could. "Hey, quick question, how are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. Truly means the world. We are just getting started. And already the walls of Iron Halt are hiding secrets none of us are ready for. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, if you felt that moment when Frank laid his head in Lauren's lap, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you and know just how far our story is traveling. Helps more than you know. Alright, now let's get back to Lauren, because what Anna discovers in that infirmary is going to change everything. This was made clear by a young guard with the apologetic expression of someone following orders he personally found distasteful. The fortress had rooms, yes. Many rooms. But the king had said inside. And inside, apparently, had a very specific geography when it came to uninvited guests. She was shown to the kennels. Lauren stood in the doorway and looked at the clean hay, the wooden walls, the single oil lamp throwing amber warmth across the space, and thought, "This is warmer than the road." She went in. Frank followed without hesitation. He circled once, settled at her feet, and closed his eyes. By morning, every stable hand in Iron Halt had come up with some excuse to walk past that kennel door. They needed to see for themselves the king's werewolf, legendary and battle-scarred and loyal to no living soul for 10 unbroken years, sleeping at the feet of a stranger in a borrowed cloak like a dog who had finally found his way home. Word reached the king before breakfast. Lauren learned this when Alvin appeared in the kennel doorway at first light. His expression arranged into careful blankness. His hand she noticed tucked behind his back. Frank did not rise to greet him. The king's jaw worked. He looked at the wolf. He looked at Lauren. He looked at the wolf again. "Did he sleep?" he asked, as though this were a clinical inquiry. "All night," Lauren said. "He doesn't usually sleep." Lauren looked down at Frank's enormous, scarred, peacefully unconscious form. "He does now, apparently." Something moved in the king's eyes. He left without another word. But that afternoon, a guard arrived with a message. Lauren was to be moved to a proper room in the East Wing. No explanation offered. Frank walked beside her the entire way, and every person they passed in the corridor stepped back. Not from the wolf they were used to the wolf, but from the quiet authority with which this woman in a borrowed dress moved through the king's house as though she had always belonged there. She didn't know it yet. But her blood did. Anna had seen a great many unusual things in her years as a healer. She had treated soldiers who survived wounds that should have killed them. She had studied bloodlines in 3 different territories, chasing the thread of rare genetics through generations of war and displacement and deliberate erasure. She had once read an account old enough that the paper crumbled at the edges of a blood type so rare it appeared in fewer than 40 documented people in recorded history. The account called it RH null. The old scholars called it the golden blood universal donor, immune to most standard toxins, carrying markers that, in the old royal families of the North, had served as the biological signature of the sovereign line. Not metaphor, not legend, actual measurable genetic fact. The royal family had been wiped out in the Great Betrayal 10 years ago. Every member, every heir. Anna had always accepted this as settled history. She was not accepting it anymore. She sat across from Lauren in the infirmary, the girl's frostbitten hands between her own, and tried to keep her expression steady while her mind caught fire. "This might pinch," Anna said, and drew a small sample. The color, when she held it to the light, was not quite like anything she had seen before. She knew what it was before she ran a single test. The tests were just confirmation of 3 of them, methodical and precise, because she needed to be certain before she allowed herself to understand what she was looking at. Lauren sat on the examination table and watched her work. "Is something wrong with me?" "No," Anna said carefully. "Nothing is wrong with you." She set down the final vial. "Something she did not say aloud is very, very right with you. And that is the most dangerous thing I have encountered in 10 years of working in this fortress." Because James, the king's chief advisor, the silver-tongued architect of every policy decision Alvin had made since the Great Betrayal, James had made it very clear when Anna arrived what subjects were not open for discussion. The old royal line was one of them. Anna looked at Lauren, the dark hair, the sapphire eyes, the quiet dignity of a woman who had survived things she shouldn't have had to survive, and thought about the piece of paper in James's desk that she had never been meant to see. She thought about Thomas, missing for 3 weeks. She thought about the king's episodes, the blackouts, the violent transformations, the trembling hands he hid behind his back. She thought about Frank, sleeping at this woman's feet like a guard dog who had recognized something ancient and unbreakable. "Lauren," she said, "how much do you know about the Great Betrayal?" The library in Iron Halt was older than the fortress that housed it. This was something the books themselves seemed to know. They had the quiet authority of objects that have outlasted several versions of the world around them, and they sat on their shelves with the patient dignity of things that have been waiting for the right reader. Lauren found it at midnight, unable to sleep, Frank a warm shadow at her heels. She was not looking for anything specific. She was looking for Thomas the way you look for someone everywhere, even in places they could not possibly be, because grief makes the search compulsive. She found instead a section on the great betrayal. She was 3 chapters deep, her breath shallow, her hands cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature when she heard footsteps. Alvin stopped in the doorway. He was not in his armor. This surprised her. She had assumed he slept in it. He wore a plain dark shirt, the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked less like a king and more like a man who couldn't sleep either, which made him, unexpectedly, easier to look at. His eyes went to the book in her hands. Something shifted in his expression. "Where did you find that?" "Third shelf. Left side." She held it up so he could see the spine. "You kept it. It's history. It's a record of people who died." She looked back at the page. "It says here the royal family had no survivors. Every heir, every branch, every distant relation. Completely wiped out." "Yes. And you believe that?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Alvin crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, not asking permission, but not ignoring her either. He looked at the fire. "I was told," he said, "that there was nothing left to save. That ruling was an act of necessity. That if someone didn't take the throne, the North would fall apart completely." "Who told you that?" He didn't answer immediately. "James," he said finally. The word landed flat. Lauren looked at him, this man who wore his guilt like armor, who ruled an entire territory with the frozen efficiency of someone who has convinced himself he no longer deserves warmth, and felt something complicated and inadvisable move through her chest. "What if he was wrong?" she said. Frank, from his position on the hearthrug, lifted his head. Alvin looked at the wolf, then at Lauren, then back at the fire. "Then," he said quietly, "I have spent 10 years ruling something that wasn't mine to take." The fire crackled. Outside, snow had started again, the heavy, purposeful kind that meant business, burying the road back to nowhere under another layer of impossible white. "My brother used to say," Lauren said, "that the most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like mercy." Alvin was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What was his name?" "Your brother." "Thomas." Her voice stayed steady. She had practiced this. "He disappeared 3 weeks ago. He was trying to find something. Documents, I think. About the old bloodlines." Something moved across Alvin's face, fast and complicated. "What kind of documents?" "I don't know," Lauren said. "He wouldn't tell me. He said it was safer if I didn't know." She looked up and found Alvin watching her with an expression she still could not fully decode, but behind the frost of it, something had cracked open. Something that looked like a man beginning to understand that the ground beneath him is not what he was told it was. Frank stood, walked to the space between them, lay down, his great body bridging the distance. Neither of them moved to close him away. Stephanie had worked in Iron Halt for 22 years. She had served under the old royal family and had braided the hair of a small, dark-eyed princess once, a girl who laughed too loud and climbed things she shouldn't and looked at the world with the unguarded certainty of someone who had never had cause to be afraid. That princess had died in the great betrayal. This was what Stephanie had believed for 10 years. She revised this belief on a Tuesday, watching Lauren eat breakfast. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of the way Lauren held her fork, not like someone who had learned it but like someone who had always known it without being taught. The way she moved through a room, confident and quiet, the unconscious spatial awareness of someone raised to understand that her presence mattered. The way she spoke to the junior kitchen staff was not like a guest, not like a superior, but with the specific warmth of someone who genuinely sees the people around them as people. And her eyes, dark, with that unexpected depth of blue in certain light. Stephanie had seen those eyes before. "Come here," she said, setting down her ladle. "I'm going to teach you something." Lauren looked up. "Court etiquette," Stephanie said, as though this were perfectly ordinary, as though she were not looking at a girl she was increasingly certain was something impossible. "How to read a room." How to know who holds the real power before anyone tells you. How to walk into a space and make it yours without anyone understanding why they've just accepted that. Lauren tilted her head. Why? Because knowledge, Stephanie said carefully, is the only currency that can't be taken from you. And I suspect you're going to need it soon. Frank, from his position beside Lauren's chair, looked at Stephanie with his amber eyes. She looked back. Yes, she thought. No. She had known since the second day. She had simply been waiting to understand whether knowing was safe. This was what Lauren had noticed first about the king's chief advisor, the silver-haired man with the impeccable suit and the smile that arrived exactly a half-second too late to be spontaneous. He moved through the fortress without creating friction, without drawing attention, always at the edge of every room and the center of every decision. She didn't trust him. She didn't know why yet. This bothered her. The morning her room was searched, she was in the library. She came back to find a guard waiting outside her door with the careful expression of someone delivering bad news by order. "The king would like to speak with you," he said. "About a missing inventory item." The throne room was cold. Alvin stood at the far end, and the object on the table between them, a small carved ivory figure from the king's private collection, sat there like an accusation. James stood to the right, his expression composed into something that looked almost like regret. "It was found," James said, "in the lining of your cloak." Lauren looked at the figure, then at James, then at Alvin. "I didn't take it," she said. "Of course," James said, with the specific kindness of someone enjoying themselves. "I'm sure there's an explanation." Alvin said nothing. He was watching her, not with accusation, she realized, but with the expression of a man working a problem from two directions simultaneously. He was watching her face, and he was watching Frank, who had entered behind her and was now standing very still in the center of the room, his amber eyes on James. "Your Majesty," a guard said from the doorway, hesitant, uncertain. "The wolf, he's been in the East Wing. Advisor James's study. He brought something back." The room turned. Frank walked to the table and set something down. Small cloth. Inside it, a duplicate of the ivory figure, along with a document bearing a partial fingerprint and a description of the item that predated Lauren's arrival by 4 days. The planning had come first. The framing had come second. James's smile did not waver, but something in his eyes went very still. "Interesting," Alvin said. His voice was quiet, the quiet of deep water. "James, would you like to explain how a pre-existing document about a stolen item ended up in your desk?" The silence that followed was the most dangerous silence Lauren had felt yet. This was how it went. Lauren was learning, Frank led, and she followed, and together they discovered things that the fortress had been built to hide. He moved through the lower levels with the certainty of a creature following a scent, and Lauren followed with her jaw set and her hands steady and the broken locket warm against her sternum. Sub-level 4 did not appear on any of the fortress maps she had studied in the library. The door was behind a wine rack that moved on a counterweight mechanism, old engineering, pre-betrayal construction, the kind of architectural secret that required someone with original access to know existed. The smell hit her first. Thomas. He was alive. Thin in a way that frightened her, pale in a way that suggested extended darkness, but alive, sitting up when she came through the door. His eyes adjusting to the lamp she carried, and then his face when he recognized her. She crossed the room in 4 steps and held him with both arms and did not cry, because she had promised herself she would not cry until he was safe, and he was not safe yet. "Lauren," he said against her shoulder. "Lauren, I found it. The documents." James, he knew. He's always known. The great betrayal wasn't what they told everyone. The royal family didn't all die. "I know," she said quietly. He pulled back, looked at her. "Anna ran the tests," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he asked. "How long has she known?" "Long enough that she's terrified." Lauren looked at her brother, her brilliant, reckless, irreplaceable brother who had followed the truth into a dungeon and stayed alive through sheer stubbornness. "He's been using you, Thomas." "James, your blood, there's a treatment he's been giving himself." It requires null blood. Thomas closed his eyes. I know, he said. I figured it out about 3 weeks in. Frank stood in the doorway behind them, watching and warding both, warm amber eyes scanning the darkness beyond. We need to move, Lauren said. Can you walk? I have been walking in circles for 3 weeks trying to keep my legs working, Thomas said, with the dry humor of someone who has had nothing but time. I can walk. He stood. He swayed. She caught his arm. Together, the girl who did not know she was a queen, her brother who had nearly died finding out, and the wolf who had known from the very first moment, they climbed back toward the light. He took her to the North Woods on a Sunday. She did not know why he chose Sunday. She did not ask. She was learning with Alvin that the questions that mattered most were the ones that answered themselves if you waited long enough. The trees in the North Woods were centuries old, enormous, dark-barked, their upper branches carrying snow like a held breath. The world under the canopy was hushed and navy blue and enormous with quiet. Alvin walked beside her, and Frank walked ahead of them both, and for a long stretch of time no one said anything, which was its own form of conversation. I was 17, Alvin said eventually, when James came to me. Lauren waited. He told me the royal family was gone. Every member. He showed me documents, death records, survivor testimony. He told me that if someone didn't take the throne within 48 hours, 3 neighboring territories would move on the north and there would be nothing left to rule. He paused. He told me I was the only one. Did you believe him? I was 17, he said, as though this were the answer. And it was, Lauren thought. When you are 17 and someone who has guided you your entire life presents you with documents and testimony and urgency, what do? You believe him. You do the terrible necessary thing and you spend the rest of your life carrying it. You've been ruling in guilt, she said. Every single day. The northern lights appeared without announcement, a curtain of green and violet pulling across the sky above the treeline, enormous and unhurried, indifferent to the small human troubles moving beneath them. Lauren looked up. My mother used to say, she said slowly, that the lights appear when something important is being decided. That they're witnesses. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Lauren paused. She died the night of the betrayal. I was 6. I don't remember much. Thomas remembers more when he was 11. The silence that followed was careful and full of things neither of them were ready to say directly. Alvin stopped walking. She turned to find him watching her with his hands no longer hidden behind his back. His expression open in a way she had never seen from him, unguarded, uncertain, human in a way that his role had apparently been slowly erasing for 10 years. Lauren, he said. If what Anna found is. It is, she said. Then I know. He closed his eyes. I'm sorry. It was the smallest sentence she had ever heard from him and the largest. She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward and he didn't step back, and the lights moved above them in their ancient unconcerned green, and Frank sat down in the snow and looked away with the delicate tact of a creature who has been waiting for this moment for longer than either of them understood. When they walked back to the fortress, Alvin walked with his hands at his sides. Not shaking. It was not dramatic. It was methodical, the patient archaeology of someone who has been looking for the answer for weeks and simply needed the right question. When James began increasing the frequency of the king's health tonic, a proprietary preparation he had administered personally for 8 years, claiming it managed a hereditary condition, Anna had simply done what she always did with things she didn't trust. She tested it. Lead. Mercury. Administered in low enough doses to be cumulative rather than acute, building slowly in the king's system over years, creating the blackouts, the violent episodes, the cognitive fog that had made him increasingly dependent on James's guidance. She sat with this knowledge for 6 hours before she decided what to do with it. She told Lauren first. Lauren told Alvin. She went to his study, she sat across from him, and she placed Anna's written results on the desk between them, and she watched the man she had been falling toward against her better judgment read the document that explained why his mind had been failing him. He read it twice. He set it down. He looked at his hands. 8 years, he said. Yes. He's been. Yes. The quietness that followed was different from his previous quietnesses. This one had something working inside it, something being dismantled and rebuilt simultaneously. "The Founders' Gala," Alvin said. "It's in 4 days. James has been organizing it for months. The invitation list, the proceedings, the announcements," he looked up. "He's been building toward something." "I know," Lauren said. "He's going to use it. He's going to use it to finish what he started 10 years ago," Lauren said. "And we are not going to let him." Frank, from the corner of the room, raised his head. The Founders' Gala filled the Great Hall with the North's most powerful people: territorial governors, military commanders, trade ministers, senior clergy, all the individuals whose collective opinion determined whether the order of things held or broke. James had chosen his audience carefully. Lauren stood in the corridor outside the hall in a dark gown. Stephanie had pressed herself, Thomas at her left shoulder, Anna at her right, and tried to remember what Stephanie had taught her about walking into a room and making it yours before anyone understood why they'd accepted that. "You were born for this," Stephanie said quietly, from behind her. "I was born to find my brother and go home," Lauren said. "Same thing, as it turns out." Thomas squeezed her hand. She walked in. The moment James saw her enter with Thomas, who was supposed to be in sub-level 4, Thomas, who was supposed to be leveraged, she watched his composure recalibrate. Professional. The adjustment of a man who has survived by being the cleverest person in every room. He pivoted. He had the poison in the king's wine before Lauren had crossed half the hall. She saw it happen, and she could not stop it from this distance, and she watched Alvin lift the glass with the composed authority of a man who did not yet know what was in it. "Stop!" Her voice carried farther than she expected. The hall turned. She was already moving. "That wine has been poisoned," she said, and her voice did not shake, and the room recognized something in it, some frequency of authority that bypassed analysis and landed in the gut. "Heavy metal compounds. 8 years of administration. Ask your court healer." James raised the silver blade. "This woman," he said, smooth and certain and almost convincing, "is a spy and an imposter, and I will not allow her to." Lauren sliced her palm. She did not plan it. The knife was on the table. The action was instinctive, the way some truths demand to be told physically, in the only language that cannot be argued with. She crossed to Alvin. She held her hand over his, and her blood golden-blooded, Rh0, the biological signature of the royal line that James had spent a decade insisting was dead, touched his skin. The room felt it before anyone understood what had happened. Alvin felt it. His spine straightened. Some fog she had not realized was still there, cleared from his eyes. He looked at her really, the way he had looked in the North Woods with the lights above them, and something settled in his face. James lunged. Frank was faster. The silver blade clattered to the stone floor. James stumbled back. The werewolf stood between them with his amber eyes and his ancient scars and every ounce of a loyalty that had been waiting 10 years for its rightful direction. He turned to Lauren. He bowed. The head of the most powerful werewolf in the North, lowered to the stone floor at Lauren's feet. The great hall fell into the kind of silence that rewrites history. "The royal blood," someone whispered, old enough to remember, old enough to have been watching Lauren since she walked through the door and trying to name what they recognized. "The Rh0 line. The high bloodline." James backed toward the doors. The doors were already flanked by guards who answered Alvin, guards who had watched their king's transformation and drawn their own conclusions. "James," Alvin said. His voice had changed. 8 years of lead and mercury and deliberate fog burned away in a single moment of clarity. "We have some things to discuss." 3 days later, when the snow had stopped and the sky over Iron Halt had turned the particular pale gold of a genuine thaw, Alvin met Lauren in the throne room. He was holding the crown. The real one, the old one, the one that had belonged to the royal line before the betrayal, had been kept in a locked chest in the archive because James had told Alvin it was purely ceremonial now, a relic, something to display at galas. He held it out. "This," he said, "is yours." Lauren looked at it. She looked at him. "I came here," she said carefully, "to find my brother." "I know." I didn't come here for any of this. I know. The North needs to be rebuilt properly, she said. The tax laws are unsustainable. I've read the regional reports, and the burden on the lower territories is. I know, Alvin said, and something in the corner of his mouth moved. I've been told. She looked at the crown. She looked at him. I'm not ruling alone, she said. I won't do it the way James built it, one person with unchecked authority and everyone around them positioned to enable it. That's what broke the last system. I was hoping, Alvin said quietly, you might be willing to consider a different arrangement. Frank, who had been lying in the throne room doorway with the territorial confidence of a creature who considers all significant spaces to be his personal living room, lifted his head and looked between them. Lauren reached out and took the crown. She held it, weighing it, set it down on the arm of the throne. First, she said, we deal with the tax structure, then the territorial governors. Then the sub-level 4 investigation. I want a full accounting of everyone James held there and why. She met Alvin's eyes. Then we can talk about crowns. Alvin looked at the crown, then at her. You know, he said, most people when offered a throne begin with the throne. Most people, Lauren said, haven't spent 3 weeks outside iron gates in a blizzard with nothing but a broken locket and the understanding that power without accountability is just cruelty with better furniture. Was fair, Alvin said. Thomas, from the doorway where he had been unashamedly listening, said, I like her. You always liked her, Alvin said without turning around. She's your sister. I know, Thomas said. I'm just glad you caught up. Frank's tail swept the floor once, slow and satisfied, the way it did when he considered a situation adequately resolved. Outside, the thaw continued. What we found in these halls behind the iron gates and the frozen courtyard, and the deliberate cruelties of people who mistake power for permanence is something worth carrying with you beyond this story. Courage is not the absence of fear. Lauren walked into the path of a warhorse with frostbitten hands and a shaking heart and a broken locket that was the only thing she had left. She was not fearless. She was simply unwilling to let the fear be the end of the sentence. And this, the truth about who you are cannot be buried permanently. It can be hidden, suppressed, misdocumented, and locked in sub-basements, but biology remembers. The character remembers. And sometimes, an old wolf with amber eyes and the weight of ancient loyalty sees it clearly long before anyone else is willing to look. Iron Halt is not a kingdom anymore. It is a work in progress, governed by 2 people who are learning together, that real strength lives in the willingness to be wrong and then do better. James answered for what he built. Thomas healed. Stephanie got the acknowledgement she had earned across 22 years of keeping this household together. Anna continued her work, the important, unglamorous, absolutely essential work of finding out the truth and then having the courage to say it. And Lauren and Alvin ruled not as conqueror and subject, not as king and decorative queen, but as 2 people who had both been failed by the same lie and decided that rebuilding something true was worth more than preserving something comfortable. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? I genuinely want to know. This story traveled from a blizzard to a throne room, from a broken locket to a golden bloodline, from a wolf's bow to a new kind of government, and if any piece of it landed in your chest the way it landed in mine while building it, please subscribe so you don't miss where we go next, hit that like, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Because that is the thing about stories worth telling. They travel farther than anyone expects. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. What we found in these halls behind the iron gates and the frozen courtyard, and the deliberate cruelties of people who mistake power for permanence is something worth carrying with you beyond this story. Courage is not the absence of fear. Lauren walked into the path of a warhorse with frostbitten hands and a shaking heart and a broken locket that was the only thing she had left. She was not fearless. She was simply unwilling to let the fear be the end of the sentence. And this, the truth about who you are cannot be buried permanently. It can be hidden, suppressed, misdocumented, and locked in sub-basements, but biology remembers. The character remembers. And sometimes, An old wolf with amber eyes and the weight of ancient loyalty sees it clearly long before anyone else is willing to look. Iron Halt is not a kingdom anymore. It is a work in progress, governed by two people who are learning together, that real strength lives in the willingness to be wrong and then do better. James answered for what he built. Thomas healed. Stephanie got the acknowledgement she had earned across 22 years of keeping this household together. Anna continued her work, the important, unglamorous, absolutely essential work of finding out the truth and then having the courage to say it. And Lauren and Alvin ruled not as conqueror and subject, not as king and decorative queen, but as two people who had both been failed by the same lie and decided that rebuilding something true was worth more than preserving something comfortable. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? I genuinely want to know. This story traveled from a blizzard to a throne room, from a broken locket to a golden bloodline, from a wolf's bow to a new kind of government, and if any piece of it landed in your chest the way it landed in mine while building it, please subscribe so you don't miss where we go next, hit that like, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. Because that is the thing about stories worth telling. They travel farther than anyone expects. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going.